Welcome to another episode of Women in Focus. Our Women in Focus today has a myriad of different positions in life, thoughts, issues. I see her as a very profound writer and an activist. I don't think she sees herself as that. Her name is Manjot Bains, and she is our Woman in Focus today. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me and for that introduction.
Well, welcome to the program. I've been thinking about this for quite some time, and it's great to interview you. Now, I said activist, and I don't think you think yourself as an activist.
No, it's not. I think maybe because I'm not leading rallies or writing op-eds in the sort of way that a lot of the activists who I look up to,
Right.
I'm not doing what they do. So although I have a lot of feelings and ideas and thoughts and opinions, I've never thought of myself as an activist.
The other day, young women were getting their arms up in revolt about Uncle's Club and all that. Mm-hmm. And in a podcast, you participated in that. What was your take on that issue?
Yeah, so that event was a really interesting panel. And so the panel I was part of was a year ago that kind of kick-started that conversation. And I think it was just born out of frustration.
Yes.
As you know, you're the only woman-owned broadcaster in the South Asian community in BC, and I'm going to guess across North Canada. And all the other stations are owned by men, and it's very frustrating because that really filters into the programming, who the hosts are, the issues that are discussed, and as women in the community, and there were younger women in our panel as well, there's just a big frustration because we're not represented. Our voices aren't heard. And so if your voices aren't heard in the mainstream, and then they're not heard on our own community media, where do you go? I mean, we are fortunate we have social media these days and we can have our voices heard in those spaces. But
yes.
It's very frustrating. I mean, I've lived here, I'm in my 40s now, and
yes.
Nothing has really changed in my lifetime. In regards to South Asian media, so definitely frustrating.
I want to take you back to your childhood. Let's just talk about, you said you were being born and brought up here. Born in a very traditional Sikh family?
I wouldn't say so. I would say a very conventional Punjabi Sikh household. My parents immigrated here in the 70s. My dad came in 71, worked in Prince George for several years before going back to India and getting married. And then my mom came mid-70s, 6 months pregnant on an airplane after an arranged marriage to Canada. And, when a lot of times I think about both of their lives, and I think a lot about my mom and how she came on that airplane, and she tells us the stories.
I know.
And none of her family was here in BC. My father's family was here. And I can't imagine doing what she did. No. And it's actually frightening when I think about it, that I still live relatively, close to my parents.
Yes.
I grew up in Burnaby here, and my life is so much easier in comparison in some respects. So they immigrated from Punjab in the 70s. I have 2 sisters and a younger brother, and I'd say a very typical in terms of I know some people had more strict traditional families.
Yes.
Mine was still, very, traditional and strict in certain senses, but I also think that we were afforded certain freedoms that I know other people I've met didn't have.
Yes.
Growing up in a Punjabi Sikh family here. So I grew up in the 80s in Burnaby, and I still think about our connection to culture. I think from a young age, I would think a lot about my identity, and especially when I was a teenager, being brought up here, doing things like watching Bollywood movies obsessively, being in love with Shah Rukh Khan, and I still remember, I feel earlier on the 80s, the movies that you would play would come on maybe Monday night.
Yes.
And I remember as a family watching those movies, recording them on VHS, and these were such a connection to culture for us, and it was such a deep part of my identity, Punjabi music, Hindi music, the movies, all of that. And so that was kind of my upbringing. I went to high school in Burnaby, and then I went to SFU for my undergraduate degree.
And what interests you at that time that you see in your day-to-day work is reflected? Was there?
I remember being in high school, and I was very good at art. And so I was in an art class, and we were doing a mosaic, and I think I was in grade 10 or 11. And my mom was a beautiful painter. We have some of her art in my parents' house. And so I remember trying to recreate something that we had in the house, like a painting or something. And a person came up to me and said, Manjot, you're not in India anymore. Like, stop thinking about Indian themed art or ideas. And I think from that, it was still in being, Punjabi or Indian or South Asian was such a big part of my identity.
Right.
And then when I went to SFU, when I started studying different courses in cultural studies, I started thinking a lot about the second generation South Asian identity and deeper, like the second generation Punjabi identity and experience. And I think my whole life kind of led up to that and that interest. And it's definitely still something that, it's still part of the work I do in different ways now. Yeah.
I want to take you to the journey from that point on, from SFU to where you are today. But let's take a short commercial break and get the program paid for.
Sure.
Thank you. Manjot is our Woman in Focus today. Don't go away. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Our Woman in Focus today is Manjot Bains. So Manjot, as a child, looking at your mom being an artist, what was the first feeling in your mind? What did you want to become when you grow up? Kids sit down and think, I'm going to be a doctor, a lawyer, or whatever. But parents always want us to have jobs that are more stable, that can bring stability in a life and bring a lot of money. Did you have a household like that? Did you feel that you wanted to do something like that?
Well, I would say first, both of my parents have, went to college in Punjab and had, multiple degrees. And, when I say my mom was an artist, she was an artist at home. She worked a labor job, like so many Punjabi immigrants who came in the 70s. And so both of my parents worked labor jobs. And so definitely there was pressure there. Academics was so important my entire life. And I remember as a child and a teenager, I wanted to be a lawyer. That was, I don't know why, but that was my thing. I was like, I'm going to be a lawyer. And I started at SFU, I was like, I'm going to be a lawyer. And then I think I started taking classes and I was like, why do I want to be a lawyer? Like, where did that come from? And so that's where things changed. But I would say my family was very much like, of course, they want us to be professionals, well settled. I'm not going to say that they were like, go live your dreams and be an artist. That is not the reality.
No, but the legal profession must have attracted you as a child. It must have. I mean, were you the one who always argued at home?
I think we all argue. We're all pretty, my mom would probably complain about that, we're all pretty stubborn. We're all quite argumentative. We're very interested in politics.
Yes.
To the point where we're not allowed to talk about politics at the dinner table anymore. And we're all in our 30s and 40s, my siblings and I. We all have very strong opinions. And I think we're also very justice focused. And I think that part of that is our upbringing. When I was a child, some of the stories we would hear, like the Sikh Sakhis, the stories of some of our gurus, the sort of sense of justice and standing up for rights. Those were really important kind of themes that I think are central for myself and some of my siblings as well, and that has then of course influenced my work ongoing from there.
Right. So once you finished SFU, and what did you major in?
Communications.
Of course.
Yeah.
So now you own your own company.
That's right. Yeah.
And can we talk a little bit about that? How did that come about?
Sure. I mean, when I graduated from SFU, I worked in corporate communications. I worked for the federal government, municipal government, finance, so quite across different sectors, and for a lot of nonprofits. And then a few years ago, I started before that, I also had an online magazine called JugniStyle.com.
That's right. I was going to talk about Jugni, but I thought it'll come in conversation.
Yeah, that was something I'd started with my friend Jyoti.
Yes.
And I was living in Toronto at that time, and I felt like I wanted a space where I could, as a young woman, feel the issue, be reflected, the issues that were important to me. So I could talk about stuff like what kind of makeup foundation works for brown skin.
Yes.
And also, interview a musician or an artist and maybe talk about an issue that's important to me. So we had this online magazine for about 8 or so years. And then during that time, I also launched Digital Handloom with a partner. And that's where I started doing communications projects. And I've actually been working on revamping that over the last year. So it's now an interdisciplinary practice where I will still do communications consulting and I do quite a bit of writing, but I'm also going to be taking on more curating projects, producing projects, kind of leaning more into the creative world.
Oh, back to the creative world.
Definitely, yeah.
You know, that's something that never leaves you. I mean, it's within you, isn't it? So, Creative Handloom, what a beautiful name for a company.
Digital Handloom.
A digital handloom. Creative was in my mind. Digital handloom. So, adding the old with the new. Digital is brand new. Handloom is an older sort of piece of equipment that people used. Was that the idea?
Yeah, you know, my partner and I were really, the kind of work we do is varied in terms of writing and communications and community engagement, but listening and including the stories of people who are not, who generally we don't hear from in the public was really important. And I think our heritage and culture is also a key part. I also am really obsessed with textiles from India and such, so that was an important part. And I think, you know, when you're writing a story, you're telling a story, you're weaving it together. So all of those kind of symbols were part of what the name became.
Right, and being brought up as, I don't think your parents are very conventional Sikh family. They are quite modern to let, you know, children grow and think for themselves, and otherwise, you know, they would be, no, you want, I want you to do this. I don't think that happened in your family at all. So
I mean, I would say sometimes. I would say sometimes, but I also know, like, we do. You know, it's not like you can't speak in front of me or you can't give my opinion. They were never like. It's not like that.
No.
Yeah.
No. So forward-thinking parents that are bringing their children up in a way that they're going to be. They are not in India, so they're in another world. So you have to embrace both those new world and the old world together, right? So I think many parents don't do that.
Right.
So you've been lucky enough to have parents who would allow you to do that. Were you allowed to meet guys and date them?
Definitely not in high school, not even at all. But when I was in my 20s, yeah, they were pretty, I mean, I was like, I have an older sister, she's 5 years older than me, and I'll say this, like most older siblings in the diaspora, children of immigrants, they go through everything first.
They have to pave
suffer.
the way.
They do, they pave the way, they suffer, they struggle, and so I would say things were easier for me, but my approach was also, I would see my friends and they would date in secret. And so I thought, I don't want to lie to my parents, I'm also not very good at it. So when I was dating, they knew. I mean, if I was meeting, it's not like I was dating all over the place, but I would tell them because I wanted that honesty.
I'm going to be going out with so and so, and then when you met the star of your life, how did you tell them?
Oh, they met Naveen, who's my husband now. They met him. Oh gosh, I can't even. I think they met him on our first date. Perhaps, because I was late getting ready, and so he was waiting outside. And my dad wasn't particularly friendly, which is not a surprise. But they actually, they knew him from the very beginning and got to know him. And now we've been married for 14 years.
Let's talk about you and Naveen a little bit and your digital handloom right after this short commercial break.
Sure.
Manjot is our Woman in Focus today. Don't go away. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Women in Focus. Manjot Bains is our Woman in Focus today. So Manjot, you met this very good-looking guy that I know very well.
Yes.
And you fell in love with him. Was it love at first sight? Was it you or him?
I'm pretty sure it was him pining after me for years.
Of course.
Actually, we were introduced by a friend at SFU. We were both at SFU. Maybe 3 or 4 years before we started dating, and we just became friends. We'd see each other once a semester or so and just meet for a lunch or something. And then, I don't know what the trigger was, but we started hanging out more, and then I I decided I'm just going to tell him I like him. And then he's like, oh, I like you too. And that was where it all started from.
And mom and dad were pretty okay about that? And
I think at first, especially for my dad,
Yes.
he's sort of a very typical father, like not very
Yes.
happy, like who's this guy dating my daughter sort of thing. And I think it took him some time to warm up, but I think my mom was, quite warm
Yes.
from the beginning. And Naveen, it doesn't take very long to
No.
also fall in love with him.
Yes,
Yeah.
no matter who meets Naveen, they all fall in love with him.
They do.
And it's his smile. That's what it is, isn't
Yeah.
it?
Yes, he's very warm.
Very. So his work and your work, does that complement each other, or do you guys talk about work at home?
Well, absolutely. I mean, we don't always, our opinions don't always align.
Ah,
But we still respect each other enough to get each other's opinions on our work. And he's actually my business partner for Digital Handloom, although I run the company primarily. He's like a creative partner there, and definitely I bounce ideas off of with him. And sometimes he'll bring an issue to me that he has at work, and we'll talk about it. So we definitely support each other in that way.
as far as, we've touched very lightly about the issues in the South Asian community. The South Asians themselves, we are an immigrant community, and your mom and dad's era, or people of that era, are hardworking people. And they wouldn't think twice. They would get up and do something for their children, right?
Yes,
You mentioned
absolutely.
your
Yeah.
mom was pregnant and traveled, to come and see your dad here. I usually think about my parents packing 6 kids and going from one country to another. And my dad was in his 50s when he decided he wanted to move from Africa to England. So you need gumption to do things like that. So
Yeah.
those people had totally different kind of, grit, I would
I
say.
think so. Almost a sense of, sometimes I think about my father. You must have a sense of adventure.
Yes.
To travel across the world to a place you know nothing about. Right?
Exactly. So yeah, the sense of adventure, I think, is what, not a sense of conquering and taking over the country. But Indians usually are very adventurous people,
Yeah.
I think. So, when you look at yourself as a first generation Canadian born here, do you feel you're torn between the Eastern culture, way of thinking, and Western? Or do you feel that you've, aligned it so well that you feel comfortable talking about Indian heritage, culture, and Western thought?
I don't feel torn between two cultures. I feel like, we're more than the dichotomy of just West, East, or
Yes.
Indian, Canadian. I think that can have multiple facets to our identity, and that's how I approach
Right.
my life. And I don't feel, I feel maybe I felt torn between two cultures when I was a teenager, but I haven't since. Like, I've been quite confident in who I am. I identify as like very much a Punjabi woman who's born and raised here in Canada. I speak, English and Punjabi. I listen to Hindi music, Punjabi music. I watch Hindi movies, etc. And I'm perfectly comfortable with that. I was, traveling to India once every couple of years, and trying to travel to different parts of the country there, and feel very at ease with my identities and what they are.
As a young woman in the South Asian community, a community that is emerging so fast in every field, may it be business, politics, music, you name it, our community is in the forefront. How do you see our community forging forward? Do you see it?
I mean, I think that I feel, the last couple of years I've been taking a step back. I used to be quite involved in a lot more community organizations, and I've taken a step back to reflect my own role in the community and to observe like what's going on. And I think some of the issues I see is we are really caught up, and have been for decades, in the idea of the immigrant success story.
Yes.
You came here, we settled, we made this much money and now we're a success,
Yes.
right? Or we're being model minorities, you know, making sure we do everything right. You know, if you're a politician, like towing the line, doing whatever the party says, even if it, you know, it definitely is a values-based issue or conflict that could be there. And I find that focus on this model minority and immigrant success story deeply problematic. I think it also, you know, having grown up in a family where most of my relatives were also working labor jobs and, you know, shift work
Yes.
and such, they have contributed so much to, you know, our lives, but that doesn't mean they're not, just because they're not wealthy doesn't mean you're not a success story.
Yes.
And, you know, and I've attended, I used to attend these galas in our community, and they're just like, it's like if you became a politician, you're a success. And if you became, you know, this wealthy, you're a success. You know, and of course, money, access to power, these are things that are very important in our community and others. But for me, I'm like, what are you actually doing? What are you contributing to society? How are you benefiting others? And I'm not seeing that. So I find a frustration with a lot of that sort of superficiality that I see out there. And I think I see with younger people, they're starting to kind of question some things. Definitely, I think the conversation can get deeper, but I hope that we talk about these sort of issues more.
And act on them too.
Absolutely, yes.
Where do you see yourself in the next 5 years?
In the next 5 years, I mean, I'm very excited about some of the projects I have lined up in the coming years for with Digital Handloom and with my writing. I'm hoping to publish a lot more of my thoughts publicly around, you know, being a South Asian woman, some of the issues we've talked about today, just publishing more, and definitely curating a few more, you know, public art projects through our company as well.
You know, I haven't done justice to this interview. I should have asked you way more questions, but you know what the clock says, time is over. So I thank you very much for coming and talking to us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Manjot Bains has been our Woman in Focus today. I am positively going to invite her again, and it's going to be a totally different interview. I promise that. Don't go away. We'll be right back.